Chapter 2 focuses on the United States as a nation shaped by immigration and relationships between different groups. From the beginning, we saw that immigration has played a major role in building American society, and it also created debate and conflict throughout history. We have also seen plenty of times, especially in today's world, about who truly belongs, deserves full rights, and is really defined as being an American. In this chapter, it really raises a central question, and that question is the United States really a land of opportunity and inclusion for everyone? We see that sociologists have questioned whether it is or if it's been shaped by exclusion, inequality, and struggle over power, which is why two paths are talked about in this chapter. To start us off, we see that Chapter 2 refers to assimilation and pluralism. These two are relied on by sociologists to explain relationships between dominant and minority groups. You may ask, well, what is assimilation? Well, assimilation refers to the process in which minority groups gradually adopt the cultural values and behaviors of the dominant group. We have also seen that assimilation has three major models, starting off one of the first major ones, which is Anglo-conformity. Anglo-conformity is where immigrants are expected to abandon their cultural traditions and adopt Anglo-American norms. This is so that they can get better access to jobs, education, opportunities, and ultimately just acceptance. The next one we have is the melting pot idea. Now, the melting pot idea is that the diverse groups who come together create this new and unique society with a common culture. This also suggests that America would change immigrants in exchange for immigrants changing America. Next, we have the human capital theory, which supports assimilation by arguing that success comes from individual effort, education, and skills. This theory does help explain upward mobility, but it is also criticized for ignoring barriers like discrimination and unequal access to resources. Now, we did mention that there were two. It was assimilation and pluralism. Now, pluralism offers an alternative path for assimilation. And what is it? Well, it's pretty much expecting differences to disappear. And pluralism allows group differences to continue over time. And with that being said, there's two types of pluralism. There's cultural pluralism and structural pluralism. Cultural pluralism happens when groups haven't maintained their new identities. These groups often speak different languages, practices, and values. Then there is structural pluralism, and this is when groups who have the same or share similar cultures, but due to them not being integrated, they don't have equal access to resources, power, and opportunity. This shows that assimilation and equality can exist at the same time. Now, we have talked about both pluralism and assimilation, but I want to also talk about the traditional view of assimilation. This is called Gordon's theory. Now, the traditional view of assimilation is largely based on the work of sociologist Milton Gordon. Gordon argued that assimilation happens in stages rather than all at once. Gordon's theory seems like it occurs in stages. We see that the first stage is acculturation, which is when minorities adopted to the culture, language, and values of the dominant group. Next, we see integration at the secondary level, which is participation in the dominant groups in institutions and organizations. Next, integration at the primary level, where minorities become close friends and are able to enter cliques and groups of the more dominant. After that, there's intermarriage, where minorities marry members of the dominant group. Gordon argued that acculturation to integration is an extremely important part of the assimilation process. After seeing both assimilation and pluralism, as well as Milton Gordon's theory of assimilation, we also see that there are other groups of relationships. Not all groups seek assimilation or pluralism as their paths. Some groups pursue separatism, which involves seeking political, cultural, or territorial independence. Some examples of this include Native American communities and the Nation of Islam. Other groups pursue revolution, and those minority groups who promote revolution want to become a dominant group or create a new social order with other groups. You can see this in more nations that have been controlled or conquered. After that, we see dominant group strategies. Now, this is where forced migration happens and minorities are forced to be removed from a region or country. Some examples were the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Indian Removal Act. After that, we see genocide. This is where certain acts are committed to destroy in whole or part of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. A great example of this is the Holocaust. Next, we learn about European immigration. Mass period immigration occurred mainly between the 1820s and the 1920s. The force for this immigration was industrialization. Many came from every corner of the European continent seeking jobs. This shot America in a great way since society had been industrialized and colonies would be established. America's industrialization rise to global prominence led to the growth of American military and political power. There were two major waves as well of immigration. There was old immigration and new immigration. Old immigration came from Northern and Western Europe, where new immigration came from Southern and Eastern Europe. Immigration would then decline sharply after the National Origins Act of 1924, which imposed racially biased quotas that favored Northern and Western Europeans. We then learn European origins and patterns of settlement. Northern and Western immigrants had different members such as Dutch, English, French, German, and more. Western immigrants also both shared beliefs which included the Protestant ethic, which stresses core values. Some of these values were allowed to be easier for them to be accepted into certain societies. There were also immigrant laborers from Southern and Eastern Europe who made the new immigration in the 1880s and were mostly peasants or unskilled laborers. They often faced discrimination at higher levels and rejections in those Northern and Western Europe immigrants. These immigrant laborers had settled and found in the factories, plants, mills, and mines in the industrializing Northeast. Then there were Eastern European Jewish immigrants who fled because they were getting religiously persecuted. They often settled in urban areas and worked jobs in the urban economy. Jewish immigrants created an enclave economy, and due to this, it proved to be an effective base to integrate into American society. After that, we learn about chain immigration and ethnic enclaves, where they would help other immigrants out by lending them a place to sleep, job hunt, and orient the newcomer into society. Soon neighborhoods would be filled with immigrants from certain religions, and this helped create businesses, churches, families, and mutual aid societies, as well as protection from discrimination. Discrimination was something that immigrants faced a lot when they arrived in the United States, and many of them faced intense discrimination and hostility, prejudice. And then there was also anti-Catholicism. This was because the rise in Catholicism made Protestant fear that the religion was at stake or lost status. This would then create different types of Catholicism, despite having the same beliefs and faith. Then there is anti-Semitism, where European Jews had a stereotype of being killers of Christ, which got carried along with them into the New World. This would then intensify with Jewish immigration. Anti-Semitism decreased in the 1960s in the US, but then later on increased again in recent years. There is also immigrant restriction, which you learned about, and it started with the National Origins Act in 1924 and created a system that allowed only a limited amount of immigrants into America each year. This system was openly racist and favored in Northern and Western Europeans. Back to assimilation, it generally followed a 3-generation pattern. First generation of immigrants often stalled into ethnic brands and made a little movement into acculturation and integration. In the second generation, these were the immigrant children, and they were marginalized due to them being part ethnic and American. They were born in America and raised in ethnic households that answered public schools, learned old languages, and more. The third generation would be the immigrants' grandchildren who were raised in non-ethnic settings. They had strong relationships and ties with the grandparents and old neighborhood as well. Ethnicity was a minor part of this generation's life. Then there was ethnic succession, where European ethnic groups affected others unintentionally. And as older immigrants groups gained experience and moved up, the newly immigrants would replace them and start the process again. Structural mobility increased as education expanded and new middle-class jobs became available as well. Education became an important part to get access to better jobs. Structural mobility still is key to eventual succession. Then there were also variations of assimilation, such as degree of similarity, where certain immigrant groups faced more resistance than others due to resemblance in religion, language, culture, and physical appearances. Then there was social class, which affected structural integration. Then there was gender, where immigrant women weren't seen as important as the men and were often discouraged to have a public life, education, and leadership roles. They would still contribute to the family by working outside of home, doing laundry, sewing, and other activities. With that being said, scholars still debate if the traditional perspectives about European immigrants and their descendants still apply more than recent immigrants today. There's also the debate on whether the state should follow the path of assimilation or pluralism, which has been going on for more than a century. Chapter 2 is very interesting. We learned about both assimilation and pluralism in the United States and dominant minor relations. We saw in depth what assimilation is and how it comes into play, as well as pluralism.